Okay, well, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. John Caldwell. I'm an experimental psychologist, and my specialty area is fatigue management and sleep optimization, primarily working with the aviation or aerospace community. But really, the things that I do apply to just about any operational personnel, and certainly what I'm going to talk about today, which is the importance of health for both the importance of sleep for both health and performance is going to apply to anybody across the board. So what I'm going to talk about is four important topics: why we sleep, how much we need to sleep, what happens when we don't get enough sleep, and how we can get better sleep. And the primary point of the whole talk is that to show that despite beliefs to the contrary, we really do need to get adequate sleep every day in order to be our best, whether that's from a performance standpoint, from a health standpoint, or from a safety standpoint. So the cultural message has long been that sleep is for sissies. If you're a hard charging, dedicated professional, then, you don't need very much sleep. If you're sleeping, you're wasting time. But there's been plenty of scientific evidence that sleep is essential for each one of us. And this macho attitude thinking that, if we're the hard driving, really care about our job type, and so we don't need to sleep, it's actually a safety hazard. And so sleep is vital for survival. We know that. We've known that for years, but it's becoming more and more evident with each decade that comes by. And I'm going to show you some of that evidence in this presentation. If we're not sleeping enough, it's actually slowly killing us. And it's something that we really need to prioritize far more than we have been. So why do we sleep? Well, believe it or not, the exact function of sleep is currently unknown, and is sort of a peculiar thing. When you look at all the things that you can't do while you're sleeping, then you would think that Mother Nature would have gotten rid of the need to sleep, because you can't reproduce, you can't attend to your environment, and so on and so forth. So the fact that it's still around, then it must serve some very important evolutionary advantage, or else it would have gone away. But it's obviously worthwhile. I won't cover all the proposed functions, but I'll mention 5 of them here. The first one being that sleep serves an immune function, because we know that sleep is altered during infectious diseases. We know that sleeping more improves our body's capability to avoid disease. And then if we actually do get sick or we have some sort of medical problem, sleep improves the process of recuperation. And so, you've probably experienced this yourself. If you're coming down with a cold or something, then long before you get the sniffles or the cough or whatever, then you just feel a little sleepy and you're wondering, well, what's going on here? And I think that's your body's message to you that you're about to have a problem, and we're doing our best here to fight it off. Plus, whenever you have the flu or the cold or anything, you really just want to lay around and sleep all the time. And so again, that's your body trying to help you with that immune system functioning. The second thing is that we know that sleep restores energy in the body. So the metabolic rate significantly drops during sleep, and that allows us time to restore energy that's been depleted during the period of wakefulness. So if you think about this, from a standpoint, if you're an athlete, if you're training to 100% of your effort every day and you don't take recovery breaks in between, then you're going to be at a serious disadvantage once you hit the playing field, because you need some downtime in order to recover from all of that activity that you've done when you're hard charging. But it also restores energy in the brain because during sleep, glucose consumption drops to half of what it is during wakefulness. And that's allowing the brain to have some time to recover some of that energy that it's expended while you're awake and provide you with enough energy on a daily basis to support all of your brain's activity. And this is one of the most interesting one, number 4, that sleep serves a lymphatic function because it's been discovered, and this has been replicated, that there's enhanced convective flow from the brain to the circulation during sleep. And this allows a cleaning out of toxins that build up as a function of waking metabolism and waking activity. So it sort of allows your brain not only to restore energy, but to clean out any toxins that are present. And that includes those beta amyloids that have been associated with Alzheimer's disease. And then the 5th one that I'll mention today is that we know sleep is key for the maintenance of neuronal plasticity. So it allows us to get rid of obsolete memories, to make new memories, and to maintain what we've learned. And we see that particularly with these studies that have been done on students. And there's a move in the country to make school start times later in the day that they are. And that's because younger people actually need more sleep than adults, and they have a later circadian rhythm than adults. And so by requiring them to get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning in order to catch the bus to go to school, we're cutting into the sleep period. And so the schools that have actually gone to a later start time, and this includes some research that's been done at the military academies, has been found to have a positive impact on things like grade point average, the probability of successfully graduating and moving on to higher levels of education. So we know that there's a positive impact on academic performance by getting good sleep. But, the same thing applies to us. Every day in our lives, we may not learn a whole lot of new things, particularly when we get up in age like yours truly, but still you're exposed to new things every day, and you want to be able to really hang on to those important things and get rid of the things that are just taking up space that you don't need. So, despite this debate about the exact function of sleep, there's no doubt it's essential. And I've got a reiteration of what I've already said, spoken by somebody who's much more well-spoken than I am. So anyway, check out Matthew Walker's YouTube videos out there because they're really great and talks a lot about what we know about the impact of sleep and also the impact of sleep deprivation. But I'll go ahead and move on to answering the question of how much sleep we actually need. And in 2015, the National Sleep Foundation assembled a group of experts in this area, and the consensus was that adults need a minimum of 7 hours of sleep per day. So if you look at this graph, you can see that younger people need more than that. But once you hit adulthood, from when you make it to an adult to the end of your life, that 7-hour minimum is what we need in order to be our best. So are we getting that? Well, a third of U.S. adults sleep less than 7 hours a night. Almost half of night workers have short sleep, and a third of people 17 years or younger are sleeping less than recommended. So obviously, we are not getting enough sleep. Now, I think to some extent the message is getting out that we need sleep and that it's important. So things are improving a little bit, but we're still not where we need to be as a society. So why aren't we sleeping enough? Well, there are a number of factors, and I've listed them all here, and I just want to briefly address each one of these. So to start with, poor sleep habits, poor sleep hygiene. People take their sleep for granted, so they develop bad sleep habits. They don't create a comfortable sleep setting. They do things in the bedroom that aren't conducive to sleep. And because of that, those bad habits account for a large percentage of insomnia. Again, lifestyle choices. They stay up too late to watch TV or socialize or go to the ball games. They have inconsistent schedules, don't exercise or control the diet properly, drink too much alcohol, consume too much caffeine, and they may take medications or use substances that disrupt their sleep. So poor lifestyle choices can lead to poor sleep. Work obligations. 20 million Americans work these different types of shifts, evening, night, split or extended shifts, rotating shifts. And when you think about it, Mother Nature really didn't design us to be moving our work rest schedules around the clock the way that we do now. I mean, the electric light bulb was created in the late 1800s. And before that, we couldn't really see well enough to work around the clock. And in the military, for instance, night vision technology came about in the 50s. So when you think about the millions of years that we human beings have been on this earth, those technological capabilities that have allowed us to do this sort of shift work, that's a relatively new invention. And so we weren't designed to be able to keep such inconsistent schedules. And so we pay for that in terms of inability to fully adjust and to fully get the amount of sleep that we need when we're doing these things. And then on top of that, 31 million Americans work more than 48 hours a week. So long work hours, inconsistent schedules, you put that together and you're going to have short sleep hours. And then sleep disorders. And, you know, this is something that we often don't think about as a fatigue countermeasure. So if you're in charge of fatigue management for your unit or your company, you might think about all the other things that are getting in the way of people getting adequate rest, but you might not think about sleep disorders. And 50 to 70 million US adults have one. A lot of people experience insomnia. Sleep apnea affects 25 million adults, and 80 to 90% of the cases of sleep apnea are unrecognized and remain untreated. There's a small percentage of people, but they're still out there. They're suffering from narcolepsy and sleep disorders of any type, and there are a number of others besides the ones I mentioned here, rob us of the restorative value of sleep, but oftentimes they go undiagnosed and untreated. And so I'm going to talk to you about ways to improve your sleep. If you do all of those things that I recommend and you find that you're still having alertness problems during the day, it's possible that you could have an undiagnosed sleep disorder. So it's worth raising that possibility to your physician. And then there are other medical conditions, and I won't spend a lot of time on these, but as you can imagine, there are quite a few disorders out there that can cause sleep disruptions or changes in sleep architecture, which impairs the restorative value of your sleep. And then once we don't get enough sleep, or once the restorative value of sleep is disrupted, what happens? Well, let's start with the effects on performance. Adequate sleep is one of the most important factors for optimal performance. If we're not sleeping enough, the cognition is going to be affected. We're going to have learning deficits. We're going to have safety problems because of things like inattention, slow reaction times, lapses, and so forth. And we're going to have accidents. And the more we restrict our sleep, so if we need 7 hours a night, but now we're only getting 5 hours every day that goes by, then you're gradually building a greater and greater sleep debt with each one of those short sleep periods. And the problem is that you don't realize what you're doing to your performance capabilities because your judgment becomes impaired along with your performance. So just looking quickly at some of the work performance issues that show up, we've got inability to properly assess safety risk, problems with decision making. We know there are increased errors, forgetting to do things you're supposed to do. These unpredictable lapses into sleep are particularly dangerous. And I think we've all had those. You know, if you tried to do one of those long trips where you're driving through the night and it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly you find yourself hitting those rumble strips at the side of the road and scare yourself half to death because you realize, okay, I just went to sleep. I could have, you know, hit a telephone pole or an oncoming car or something, but you don't stop. You say, well, I won't do that again, but you don't stop and take a nap or get rest. And what happens? 10 minutes later, you have another uncontrollable lapse into these micro sleeps. And obviously, when the world is going by and your lights are on, but nobody's home, that creates some significant safety risk. And so all of these problems are going to impair performance at work. And as a result, sleep loss impairs safety. So, look, fatigued people are 3 times more likely to have a car crash. They're almost twice as likely to have some sort of work related mishap. Drowsy driving gives us 100,000 crashes per year in the United States alone. And a 2017 look at major aviation mishaps that were investigated by the NTSB cited fatigue as a contributing or causal factor in 23% of those mishaps. So it's a big problem, whether you're in aviation or in any other type of safety sensitive context. But, you know, what does it do to our health? Well, over the past couple of decades, a lot of research has come forth saying it's not just performance that we need to worry about, but it's your health. If you're getting less than 7 hours per night, then you're increasing your risk of having all sorts of health problems. And the more you sleep restrict yourself, then the greater those risks become. Sleep loss impairs neurological health, so it predisposes you to things like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, MS, stroke, even epilepsy. Sleep loss impairs physical health. There are really clear links at this point between obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and inflammation just due to insufficient or disrupted sleep. And then you've got these other problems here to include an increased risk of all-cause mortality, something I'll come back to in just a minute. And then sleep loss impairs psychological health. So insufficient and disrupted sleep has been related to anxiety, PTSD, schizophrenia, alcoholism, and interpersonal difficulties. So, I mean, it's not only your work relationships, but your family relationships that are going to be impacted if you're chronically getting insufficient sleep. And, you know that yourself. If you think about when you were unable to get enough sleep because of shift work or because of jet lag or whatever the problem was, you become irritable. And you just want to get rid of those things that are bothering you. And a lot of times you do that in ways that are not going to create the most harmonious family life and work life. So it's something to be aware of from a psychological standpoint. And then the mortality risk thing, I just cited this investigation, which you can see on the bottom of the slide, that short sleep durations, which is less than 7 hours a night, increase mortality risk by 14% when compared to a 7 or 8 hour per night sleep episode. And you won't have any problem believing that if you just reflect on the slides that I just showed you. I mean, look at the health risks, look at the problems that you have in the workplace and on the highways, et cetera. It's no wonder that when you're not sleeping as well as you should, it's going to increase the risk of premature death. So those people that say, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead, they may get to find out more about that sooner than they think. So it's definitely important from a mortality risk standpoint. I just want to show you this flow chart. Hans van Dongen, one of my colleagues, was kind enough to let me borrow this. And it shows you some of the pathways to disaster that getting insufficient sleep and having these body clock disruptions create. So we start with it decreases your circulating melatonin levels and increases your cancer risk. It also disrupts your hormone regulation and from appetite control standpoint. And so you want to eat more, you want to eat more unhealthy food, and that contributes to obesity. It creates changes in your sex hormones, which creates premature aging and also is an obesity factor. And then on top of that, you get higher levels of circulating adrenaline and cortisol. So you have greater levels of stress and inflammation. And again, that oftentimes leads to unhealthy food intake and obesity. And then once you get obesity, look at the problems you have. You get increased insulin resistance. So you've got higher levels of chronically circulating glucose. You have increased inflammation, endothelial dysfunction. So you have higher blood pressure. And all of that ultimately leads to metabolic syndrome. So it's a real problem. And there's a lot of research out there that backs up everything that I'm telling you today. So, how can we get better sleep? Well, you know, if you work in aviation and you work in medicine or in a lot of other occupations, where you have to deal with shift work, you have to deal with time zone changes, you have to do long duty periods, then you're thinking, well, I'm not going to always be able to get my 7 hours a day, but you can certainly maximize the restorative value of any sleep opportunities you have while you're trying to find ways to get that full 7 hours. But we've got to make sleep a priority, improve our sleep habits, perhaps take use of technology to track and optimize sleep, and getting checked for those sleep disorders because sleep is a key fatigue countermeasure. Most of my career actually was dealing with the effects of sleep deprivation on military pilots. And there in the military, under certain circumstances, we have the opportunity to use stimulants, prescription stimulants. So I did a good bit of work with dextroamphetamine. And dextroamphetamine is a wonderful drug for improving alertness. And in fact, it'll maintain your performance at well rested levels despite a significant amount of sleep deprivation. But all it's doing is propping you up. It's not replacing your need for sleep. So a lot of people talk about the amphetamine crash. Well, it doesn't have anything to do with the drug other than the fact that the drug now you've discontinued it. So all of that sleep pressure that's been building up while that drug was helping you stay awake comes crashing through. And now you've got to try to pay all of that back. And so you're extremely fatigued, and it's just all you can do to stay awake. The only true fatigue countermeasure that's natural is going to be sleep, and that's why cockpit naps, bunk sleep on board ultra long haul flights, etc., are so effective at maintaining performance. So let's just talk about each one of those things briefly. So make sleep a priority. According to Harvard Medical School, they're saying we need to stop thinking of sleep as a commodity and a lifestyle choice, but rather as the third pillar of health. So we spend a lot of time and effort with our diets and with our exercise routine, but then we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how we can improve our sleep and get enough sleep. So what can we do? Well, if you're on the go all the time, it's time to take a look at your schedule and say, is there something I can reprioritize here? Can I say no to some of these requests? Can I delegate responsibilities to someone else on the team that maybe can take some of this workload in order to make sure that we have those extra hours for relaxation and sleep? we've got to think of sleep as an investment, not a waste of time, because we know from the research that's out there, if you're getting that minimum of 7 hours every day, you're going to be smarter, more focused, productive, happier, and healthier. Start believing that sleep is a health and work benefit that it actually is. Step two, improve your sleeping habits. So this is according to a meta-analysis that was recently published where they were looking at just the effects of changing behavior as opposed to using some sort of pharmacological intervention, and saying that following the right habits can have a positive impact on every aspect of your sleep quality. And so that means that creating and sticking to good sleep habits is going to improve the ease of falling asleep and enhance your sleep quality. And, these are things a lot of us are going to look at this list, which I'm going to show you and go, well, that's a no brainer. But maybe you work with people, maybe you're a healthcare provider, maybe you're responsible for your unit's safety. It's amazing how many people don't pay attention to all of those good sleep habits. So I just want to run you through those just to remind you of these real quickly. And so you can pass them along if you're in charge of fatigue management or health management for other folks. So you can make sure they're following these. I've already mentioned the fact that inconsistent daily schedules is a problem. You program your body to go to sleep at a certain time every day. And if your schedule is all over the place, that's going to create problems with going to sleep and staying asleep. Use the sleep area only for sleep and things that ultimately are conducive to sleep. If you're carrying your laptop in the bedroom and you're on your cell phone or you decide to do your taxes or have contentious discussions with your partner in the bedroom, that creates poor associations. I think about a good comparison is if you go to the gym all the time and work out, you've had those days where you thought, man, I just don't even want to go over there today. But you'll feel guilty if you don't go. So you make yourself go to the gym. And what happens? I mean, once you get there, you have a perfectly fine workout. And that's because everything in the gym is signaling to your brain and your body that you're here to work out. You're not here to have a smoke or a drink or watch TV or play on your phone or whatever. You're here to work out. Well, you want to program your sleep area so when you walk into that bedroom, that environment is telling you it's time to come in here and go to sleep. It's not to do all these other things. If you're a worrier, and I certainly am, get a little sticky pad, and write down what you need to do the next day before you ever go into the sleep area, or, text yourself a message or put something on your electronic calendar to make sure that you don't forget what you need to do tomorrow. And so you won't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh my God, I hope I don't screw up tomorrow and miss some details I'm supposed to attend to. Use a consistent getting ready for bed routine. And so that means just following the same behaviors that you do on a day-to-day basis. So maybe you watch TV for a little while, then you take the dog for a walk, then you read a book for a little while, then you take a hot shower, and then you go to bed. Following that exact same routine on a daily basis prepares you for your oncoming sleep onset time. It'll make it possible for you to go to sleep faster and to stay asleep longer and more consistently. Cardio exercise anytime during the day has been shown to significantly improve sleep quality, and avoiding electronic devices in bed and near bedtime. And there are more and more publications with this. A lot of the problems with looking at your computer or your phone, and even some of these LED television sets, is that you get hit with this blue wavelength of light, or it's a bright type of light. And so there's that. Both of those things have an immediate effect on your central nervous system. And then there's also the fact that, if you're looking at emails or you're on your phone right before bedtime, then you're becoming cognitively engaged in what's going on when really you should be trying to relax, get into sleep mode. But now you're staying in school mode or work mode or whatever. So it's time to get rid of those things at least a couple of hours before bedtime and avoid using them at all in the bedroom. Ensure your sleep environment is quiet, dark, cool, and comfy. So the recommended temperature for bedroom is 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and it should be so dark that you cannot see your hand if you hold it out at arm's length in front of your face. So that's pretty pitch black dark. But, spend a little time with the bedroom. And I got to tell you, I've worked a lot with flight simulator facilities in doing sleep deprivation studies, of course, because we're running those, throughout the day and the night. And oftentimes I find that shift workers, they come in, for instance, and they, turn the lights off at night. And they talk about having problems when they go home sleeping during the daytime. And some of those problems are simply because they're not making their bedroom dark and comfortable enough. You may have to tape aluminum foil over the windows in order to make it completely dark, but it's definitely worth it. Of course, caffeine is a stimulant, so it's good not to consume it within 4 hours of bedtime. Alcohol is the number one sleep aid used by the general public. And while it does help you go to sleep faster, it significantly disrupts your sleep architecture. So your sleep just isn't restorative. So, yeah, you knock yourself out, but you're not really getting the restorative value that you need. Nicotine is kind of interesting. For about 50% of people, it has a relaxing effect, but then there are 50% of people that it has a stimulating effect. So, unless you know which of those groups you fall into, it's good to not use tobacco products or vape with nicotine products before bedtime. And then as adults, we all wake up a number of times during the night, hopefully not too many times. But when you wake up, it's a good idea not to roll over and look at the clock every time. Because when you look at that clock, then that starts a cognitive process. You're thinking, oh, how long have I been asleep? How much longer do I have to stay asleep? What if I can't go back to sleep? And you start worrying and get the brain going, and that's disruptive. So try to put that clock where you can't see it, or at least try not to look at it as much during the night. And then the third step, track your progress. Take a look at your sleep habits using fitness tracking technology. So, a 2023 survey said that more than a third of Americans use these sleep tracking devices. And about three-quarters of them find the devices helpful, with a lot of them saying they actually change their behavior because of what they learn. We're oftentimes not the best judges of our own sleep. And in fact, most people tend to really overestimate the amount of sleep that they get. And these trackers can really help give you an objective measure of how much you're sleeping and the time of day you're sleeping and the consistency of your sleep period. So we know that the wearable trackers are more accurate than the ones that are off body, at least at this point in time. And in normal sleepers, they're not, as good as polysomnography, which is the gold standard, but they're good enough to tell you whether you're sleeping too much, too little, or whether your sleep schedule is inconsistent. And so it can help you identify habits that are leading to poor sleep so you can take care of those. And then the fourth step, I'm going to mention sleep disorders once again because so many people have sleep disorders and they often don't realize they have them. Now, if you have insomnia, you know you have insomnia because you're saying, look, I can't fall asleep. I wake up all the time during the night. I can't sleep long enough in the morning. All those are symptoms of insomnia. But what about sleep apnea? With sleep apnea, you have repetitive suspension of breathing during sleep. And so what happens is when you go into the deeper stages of sleep, your muscles in your airways become more relaxed and the airway collapses and your oxygen saturation drops and your brain registers that this is going on. And so what can the brain do? It can kick you into a lighter stage of sleep, restore that tension in your airway, open it back up, and now you can breathe again. But if you're chronically having to shift into those lighter stages of sleep throughout the night, and most of those don't wake you up completely, by the way, which is why 80 to 90% of sleep apnea cases remain undiagnosed. You can imagine that that's going to really disrupt your sleep quality. Restless leg syndrome is when you have prickly or tingly sensations in your legs where you feel like you have to move them around a lot. And usually, right after you move them, then it relieves the problem for about 10 seconds and then it comes right back. And that can help you, that can prevent you from going to sleep. And then there's periodic limb movement disorder. That's something that occurs after you've already gone to sleep. And these involuntary movements disrupt your sleep architecture. Now, if you have a sleep partner, they probably know whether you have sleep apnea or not, or can at least introduce the possibility that you might have it because you're probably snoring really loudly during night. And if you have periodic limb movement disorder, then that's probably bothering their sleep. So maybe you'll learn that you have one of those two sleep disorders by your bed partner. But if you sleep alone, then you can have these problems and not realize it. So if you find out that you know you're just chronically feeling tired during the day, but you think you're doing everything right, then you need to explore the possibility that you could have a sleep disorder because we know that workers with these problems are almost twice as likely to be injured on the job, and 13% of workplace injuries have been attributed to sleep disorders. So obviously, if you get those treated, it's going to go a long way to improving things. So just to wrap up in summary, we know that sleep is an ancient behavior. It's been around for a long time, and there's no indication that we're going to get rid of this need to sleep as despite how annoyed we may get that we actually need to spend that time sleeping. It really is important. The average adult needs at least 7 hours per day. And, sleep needs are normally distributed like everything else in nature. So the majority of people are going to need that 7 to 9 hours of sleep per day. There are actually some people that can get by with 5 hours, but that number of people is far fewer than the number of people that actually need more sleep than that, but think they can get by on 5 hours a night. So it's good to hit that 7 to 9 hour range. And if you don't get enough, then you're going to have these problems listed here, and I think we can all do without those. So if we make our sleep a priority, use good habits, take advantage of tracking technology, and think about treating those sleep disorders, then that's going to go a long way to avoiding big problems. So now we've got time for 3 or 4 questions perhaps. So if you've got any burning issues that you want to bring up here, then you can unmute yourself and feel free to ask them. Otherwise, you have my email address if you're in the Human Factors Association, so feel free to shoot me an email or get me after our next meeting, and I'm happy to discuss things further. So anyone have a question at this point? I do see we have a question by Sky.
Hi, I am a psychologist, clinical psychologist. I work at the University of North Dakota, doing assessments and doing therapy with the aviation students. I'm curious if there's any research surrounding the use of CBTI. with sleep concerns among pilots. CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, was initially used or developed for veterans. But I'd imagine the shift work makes it hard to set up a sleep schedule that would be helpful in that manualized treatment. I'm wondering, are there any studies that you're aware of with that or anything like that?
Well, I can't cite any right off the bat, but
Yeah.
CBTI is uh, the number one recommendation if you have insomnia problems from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So, the usual recommendation is that if you need to, you can use a sleep medication for maybe 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, but you need to wean people off of those medications pretty rapidly and use the cognitive behavior therapy. And there's quite a bit of evidence that it's highly successful. I don't know of any studies that were specifically pilots, but there's enough just out there on the general population, other patient groups that it's quite effective. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I think, when I mentioned those changes in behavior, I should have mentioned that as well as changes in sleep habits, that if that's not doing the trick for you, then cognitive behavior therapy is definitely the route to take. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. This was a good presentation. I appreciate it too.
All right, thank you. Well, folks, we're almost out of time, so I just want to show you a couple of more things. This book, Why We Sleep, is a wonderful book. I've already mentioned Matthew Walker previously. I've never had the privilege of meeting him personally, but he's a wonderful speaker. And as I said, he has a lot of YouTube videos out there. So if you just get on YouTube and, Google his name, then I'm sure a number of those will come up and they're very informative. And this book is written in a way that anybody, you don't have to be a sleep specialist to understand everything. And it's really well written. And some of the things in there that he talks about are quite startling. For instance, we've all often thought, and for a long time thought, that, well, once you sleep deprive somebody and then you give them a certain amount of recovery time, then they're fully 100% recovered from that. But he cites some evidence that indicates maybe you never fully recover from those periods of sleep deprivation and chronic sleep restriction. And there was an article published, I believe it was in Cell, that looked at all kinds of animal research out there that shows that perhaps this chronic sleep restriction and sleep deprivation may be doing some irreversible cellular damage. So, upsetting information to get, particularly for those of us that have done a lot of shift work, and for a lot of physicians and healthcare providers that are on call and have to work around the clock. But nevertheless, it is something that tells us how important it is to try to minimize those short sleep periods as much as possible. And if you're particularly interested in aviation operations, I cover a lot of this material with more of a focus on fatigue countermeasures in the book that Dr. Lynn Caldwell and I have, and it's available on Amazon as well, which is Fatigue in Aviation, a guide to staying awake at the stick. And Jay mentioned that he put a reference to his book on shift work scheduling, which I highly recommend. I still teach the Army flight surgeons course. In fact, I've got one coming up next month. And when I get into shift work scheduling, I basically show them your basic 8 principles of shift work scheduling and tell them to get your book and to use biomathematical models to do their shift work scheduling, because in my opinion, it's extremely um, uh, it's detailed. It's difficult. It depends on how many ships you've got, how long they're going to be, and all sorts of other factors that those of us that don't do this on a day in, day out basis find it a little challenging to manage. But that book is quite helpful, as are the biomathematical models. One of which is called 2B Alert, the numeral 2B Alert. You can Google that, and it's a free tool that's out on the internet. So you might check out some of these references. And, I really appreciate your taking time out of your day to listen to this. And I just want to remind you again that there will be a webinar next month, and it's going to be on aviation peer support programs by Dr. Scott Van Hoy. And you can see the date there, the 19th at noon. So I hope you'll plan to attend that. And also hope that you'll think about some webinars that you can contribute to yourself, because we've got so much expertise out there. I just know there's a million topics that we could cover that not only aviation personnel, but anybody that's out there working in the operational community, it would be information that they'd be really happy to have. So with that, I'm going to end the meeting and say thank you again to everyone who's here. And if you have any questions after the fact, feel free to shoot me an email. All right, folks, thank you very much. Bye-bye.